Hey there, spacers. Welcome to the Space Revolution. I am Rick Tumlinson. You are listening to us on iRock Space Radio. We're a part of the iHeart Radio Network. Good to have you back. Got a great guest today. I always love having conversations with people that I kind of go way back with in the before times. And this is certainly one of those gentlemen. His name is Steve Wolfe. And Steve is pretty hardcore New Yorker. I mean, just like he's got it. I lived there 14 years myself. I didn't get the tattoo or the chip, but Steve is like of New York, right? He went to Rensselaer and then picked up another thing, another degree in New York University. Yeah, I mean, just totally of that place. And I will say this, and we're going to come back to this topic, but Steve is also one of my Obi-Wans in terms of learning my way around Washington. I mean, he was literally, a much too used word, but literally the guy who walked me down the halls of that place for the first time and told me my do's and don'ts. And yeah, we're gonna come back to that in a minute. But Steve also has a great book out you need to go buy. It's called The Obligation. It's fascinating. It's a brief, easy read, and is the scion of one of the co-founders of the Beyond Earth Institute. The Beyond Earth Institute is doing important work. I'm going to let Steve explain that, but they're doing very important work in the area of policy in Washington, and this has been long needed in the revolution. A place where people in suits can hang out and in DC and have credible, in-depth conversations about what's coming. So without getting too much further into that, Steve, welcome, man.
Hey, glad to be here, Rick. Thank you so much for inviting me.
I'm excited.
This is really a pleasure. I think this is the first sort of this kind of forum that we've been on together. And I think you and I've been, you especially have been fighting the fight, since day one. And I've ever since we first met, we've worked together on different things along the way, but I've always enjoyed watching your star rise as you become more and more influential in the space arena. And I think really pushing some of the key important issues, of course, about human expansion into space and really being an evangelist. Reverend Rick has always been a very apt moniker for you.
I should have mentioned Steve is also a diplomat, as you can see. So Steve, I guess let's start with the Beyond Earth Institute. I want to hear where that came from. I mean, I know you and Tony DeTora and some other friends of ours kind of came together to create that.
Yeah.
How did that get started?
Well, what I always say when I'm having, how did Beyond Earth start? I like to talk about the fact that when I was on Capitol Hill and where I first met you, when I helped to draft a piece of legislation called the Space Settlement Act for my then Congressman George Brown. That bill, as you know, was ultimately signed into law as part of the NASA authorization measure, and we could talk more about that. But that was a moment in my life, early in my life, and I think somewhat early in your life too, where we saw for the first time, and that was the first time space settlement, the term appeared in public law. We saw that our vision actually could begin to become a possibility, a reality. And I think, you sort of went on to fight the good fight in the trenches for many decades. I sort of went off to do other things with other trade groups and other organizations outside of the space arena. But about 8 years or so ago, I came back into the space arena, helping to develop a conference called SpaceCom that was held in Houston for a number of years. I know we had talks around that time, and it gave me an opportunity to really engage with the community again. And as a really direct result of that, got me thinking and about the possibility of an organization that could be a bookend, if you will, to those initial times. So, whereas when we first did the Space Settlement Act, you might say that we were ahead of our time. I think a lot of people did think we were ahead of our time in our thinking. But really, in the last 5 to 7 years or so, in the recent years, the potential for space settlement has never been more pronounced. I'm not sure if you could hear my dog in the background or not. I apologize for that.
That's all right. We'll probably bring dogs into space, so we'll see how it goes.
So, but I mean, but what we're saying now is that not only are we not ahead of the curve, but we actually might be behind the curve, right? Playing a little bit of catch up and trying to understand what is needed as we prepare ourselves to become a multi-planet species. And that's really where the genesis of the Beyond Earth Institute came about. I gathered, well, you were part of this gathering at the ISDC in 2019, where I organized a one-day symposium on space policy for space settlement. And that was, extremely well attended, well received. And out of that came a cohort of individuals. Tony DeTore was one of them. Tom Murata was another. Shortly thereafter, Courtney Stad joined the team, and among others. And these are people who have significant, credentials in the space policy segment, as well as others. And we came together to say, well, okay, how do we carry this conversation forward? At its heart, the Beyond Earth Institute recognizes that there is a need for a policy think tank that can really explore in depth some of these issues that will help us to get us closer and closer to a space settlement future. So, as my mug says here, our mission is to establish and sustain a policy and regulatory framework that enables the creation of communities beyond Earth. So, people want to contact me, I'll be happy to send them a mug. I got to get you a mug, Rick. So and that's really been the heart of it. So for the past 3 years, we've been we've been pounding away at developing papers on a range of issues that on the near term side, really pushing the idea of commercial LEO destinations or commercial space stations in LEO. And we recognize that's a sort of a key stepping stone for human evolution into space, that we've got to get that right. But we're also looking at, further down the road, how do we actually finance large scale space habitats, right? So when we talk about, it's one thing talking about financing startups that are maybe Earth observation satellites, but as these infrastructure elements get larger and larger, how are we going to finance them? So we kind of run the gambit. We want to look at current space policy issues really through this space settlement lens. And I use space settlement. You and I are trying to use the language of communities beyond Earth. We look at this lens of, okay, will this policy help us get to where we want to get to in the future? And that's in a nutshell, that's sort of how we've been approaching this. We have we've had these awesome series of webinars that we've been doing. That we have a YouTube channel. We had our first live symposium last year at the University of Arizona offices in Washington, D.C. Very well attended. NASA industry, administration folks, people from Department of Commerce, U.S. Space Force. We're all there participating. We have our second one coming up in November 1st and 2nd, really just 6 weeks away. So we're looking forward to that. and we've got Ken Bowersox, who's head of the CLD program, the ISS. We've got Lieutenant General John Shaw of the U.S. Space Command, who's actually retiring. So it's going to be interesting to hear him talk a little bit more frankly than he would have otherwise. So just we've been able to engage, and what's remarkable, Rick, really, and the thing that kind of always gets me is as we are very out front about the need for policies that are going to drive space, the potential for communities beyond Earth, and talking to people at NASA, the administration, and industry, the number of folks that are like nodding their head and saying yes and yes and yes, and you probably experience it too a lot, I imagine, where folks that you wouldn't necessarily expect that this message is going to resonate. Because let's face it, there are a lot of people in the space industry that kind of don't get it, or they see that it's just way too far in the future for us, or what the heck are we even thinking about it now? But there are, for every one of those folks, there are so many more folks that do understand, and we do need to lay the groundwork now, because there is a quickening going on. I think you see it. There's such a quickening going on with the opportunities created by Elon Musk and the advent of Starship and launch capability, and as I think you were the one who coined the term, or at least the one I heard it from first, cheap access to space. That was the mantra for many years, and we're finally getting to that point that once we have cheap access to space, then all the bets are off, and it's going to be an exciting future. We need to make sure, though, that we're doing it right, and I think that's why I'm so. We could talk more about. I'm very interested. You're taking this position that we now, as we're getting closer and closer, need to take a very much a responsible attitude towards this transition, because we really are in this beginning phases of transitioning from a single planet to a multiplanetary species, and that has to be okay. We just have to fundamentally accept that. So anyway, I know, yeah, I'm one of those guys. Ask me one question, I'll talk for the 15-minute segment.
It's totally fine. I do want to correct a couple things. Cheap access to space, that came out of the Space Frontier Foundation, part of our gang. I think that one was a guy named Charles Miller. Probably, I think that was his baby. But we adopted it. I remember we called cats. It was like herding cats, right? And your place in this is huge, long term, and we come back around, and we're going to dive into that a little bit. The role that your organization is playing is hugely important, though. The legitimizing role, and so look, what we're going to do is we're going to wrap up this segment now, because you and I are going to have a back and forth on that, and we'll come back and dive in on that in just a moment. So, hey, Spacers, iRock Space Radio. My name is Rick Tumlinson. This is the Space Revolution, part of the iHeartRadio network, and our guest is Steve Wolfe. We're going to be right back in a minute. Hey, Spacers, Rick Tumlinson. Follow me at Rocket Rick on the X, which is, of course, the thing that Elon's wasting his time on, and when he should be building rockets and flying them. But thank God we have Gwen Shotwell. Little inside stuff there, sorry. But we have an amazing guest here, Steve Wolfe, and we were getting into sort of the role of the Beyond Earth Institute, Steve. You may recall back in 2015, we threw an event, Earthlight, called the Pioneering Space Summit. And it was funny because when we were putting that together, I went to my new friend, Bill Gerstenmaier, who at the time was in charge of human spaceflight. And I say new friend because we had been fighting, I'd been working to sort of create commercial space stations rather than the government, et cetera. And we decided to ally together. And it was funny because when I went in to put on this event in DC at the Reagan building there, I wanted to call it Space Settlement Summit. And Bill was like, no, you can't call it that, you know. And you and I know Bill talks very slowly and carefully and everything, but he is like, no, man, you can't call it that. I was like, why? That's what it's for, right? We're trying to get the S word because everybody called it the S word, you know. It's like was not respectable, even though what you had done a few years before. And he said, no, because if you do that, aerospace isn't going to show up. You have to give it another name. And I said, why? But Bill, and he said, look, if you want to sell them a car, you got to get them on the lot, right? And so we called it the Pioneering Space Summit, and we did end up with a VP of one of the big companies, all kinds of people there. You were there, and we had 2 days of conversation. I think we had a vote at the end where 99 out of 100 people there voted that settlement should be part of the NASA core language. Now, since then, we've made progress on that. And yes, I agree with you. To be able to speak to the new generation, where terms like settlement carry people back to some imperialistic age or something, some people. And there is a question about how sensitive should we be, of course. But we are trying to build communities and establish communities, human communities, living communities beyond the Earth. So Beyond Earth is working that issue right now, um, and that's hugely important. What do you see? What's like right on top right now in terms of making that happen? That the thing that Beyond Earth is like the most focused on that would enable that. What's on your table right now that you guys are doing?
Yeah, I think right now we are we're really focused, I think, on two main areas. One is the commercial space station, arena. I had a op-ed in Space News that was in their magazine, not just on the digital version, where I argue that the CLD program must not fail. And there's so many pitfalls
You
and
want to explain
traps.
CL? Explain
Yeah,
CL.
CLD is a NASA initiative. It's called the Commercial LEO Destination. It is an initiative to work with private companies to develop commercial space stations, and these space stations will essentially supplant or provide the types of services that are now being provided by the ISS, International Space Station, that, as most people should know, is going to be deorbited. Is it going to be decommissioned by the end of this decade or so? Maybe they'll go a few more years or so, but it's essentially to be
Yeah, we'll have
sunset.
we'll have a separate conversation about the deorbit idea. But anyway,
Yeah,
moving along.
yeah, I don't know. I saw your statement on that, but
Yeah,
that's a
go
separate
ahead.
conversation.
Say what you
But
want.
but it's creating this, because ISS is going away. It's creating this tremendous opportunity for the commercial sector to sort of pick up that vacuum, right? And NASA's highly sensitive. It's interesting right now, they're highly sensitive that they don't want this gap between their capability of the ISS and capability on these new commercial space stations, because nobody wants a situation that we had with the shuttle. The shuttle, the shuttle went away, and all of a sudden we're relying on the Russians to get Americans to the ISS. So how crazy was that? And so, especially in this orbital environment where China suddenly has a shiny new space station, and they're inviting all nations of the world to participate in that. And so we've got this, we've got this built-in competitive environment, and so there's this huge pressure to ensure that these space stations are going to succeed. Now, we're already in a situation where NASA's looking at budgetary constrictions. They're committing a certain amount of money. Maybe they're probably not committing enough money there. The guarantees that they're offering these facilities to utilize and to be sort of rent payers to use those facilities is a little unclear. A lot of the regulatory framework in terms of how these facilities will be uh, be commissioned or be approved, right? We don't even know how they're going to be. They're going to actually, the hardware is going to actually be regulated, and then what are the terms? What are the acceptable terms for people to actually live in these facilities? Because before we're just going under. The others were government facilities. Well, these are now public. These are now commercial private facilities. So there's a whole range of issues that we're trying to help the community work through, and certainly to be a platform for the folks to work through. And we have a working group on this, and we have a paper coming out on this soon. I think the other piece, and I know that sounds, I know that's not as exciting as talking about putting, a 1,000-person settlement on the moon right now, which is really the ultimate goal. But we do have a sense, we do want to create this sense that there are linchpin, moments that we have to get beyond, we have to get through, right? So in order to get to those next steps, um, and so we don't want to sidestep those at all. The other thing is the human factor. So there's what I think a lot of spacers out there, space advocates, don't fully understand is the range of unknown unknowns about the human physiology in space, and how and our ability to live uh, healthy extended periods. So we all have this idea that that generations upon generations are going to live in space in the future. Well, we're not even sure that, we have astronauts coming back from the ISS after months long tours of duty there, and they are having serious health problems of all sorts. And so fully understanding and mitigating the whole range of issues from radiation, effects of microgravity, um, and so forth are very important. So we're very keen on encouraging policies for greater and greater investment into these areas. One area, though, in particular, is the whole notion of artificial gravity, right? So artificial gravity has been sort of on the backwater of NASA's research, right? So they've done very little in that. And so, how about if we have how about if we have a artificial gravity research facility on orbit, where we can do some serious study on what the effects, or how artificial gravity will impact humans. We have no idea. I think we have some wonderful fruit fly experiments in a centrifuge, and that creates indicators. We have indicators that say fruit flies that are in centrifuges are healthier than those that are just fly around in microgravity. But there's a lot of work to do in that area. So
Yeah.
and we have a wonderful, awesome webinar on artificial gravity. By the way, if anyone wants to go to our YouTube page. So those are top priorities. I think as we move along, we will shift to more issues relating to um, space community governance, maybe enabling more enabling technology. We are generally very supportive of the cislunar environment. I did mention before, cislunar ecosystem. How do we very much want to stimulate that process, and particularly as it relates to the human presence on the moon. That's sort of the next step. It's a little bit beyond the LEO, right? Although that's very much on the near mid horizon. Let's just say mid horizon. Um, and I mentioned earlier about this sort of whole financing thing. I think is a really intriguing question, and that's sort of more, admittedly, a little bit more academic. Where how are we really going to, once somebody comes up with a workable scenario for a community, say 1,000 person to 5,000 person community in space, we're talking $100 billion plus type of investment. Or maybe it's not even going to be that big. Initially it'll be, I think you and I agree, it'll be much smaller initially. Maybe it'd be on the order of 100 or 100 to 500 or whatever. How do you then finance that? you know, and how do you manage that risk, right? It's all about risk. So all the stakeholders are coming together, and that's something that I've found very intriguing, because I think it always does come down to, no bucks, no Buck Rogers. And I think if the money is there, um, if you can show how the money can be raised, b how that money, how the stakeholders are ultimately uh, compensated in the way that they want. So government may be happy to make grants for a variety of reasons, but direct investors, they want to see a return on that investment. So how do you navigate all of that? So and again, these areas, we have four standing working group areas that may shift over time, and various stakeholders participate in that. It's interesting. Voyager, Blue Origin, Redwire, ULA. So these guys are participating in these working groups. So and it's part of what we call our leadership council. And so it's a way to help us shape these ideas, and these policies. So you'll see towards the end of the year, we'll be coming out with a series of papers that will have a series of recommendations, and that will sort of be our policy agenda for the coming year. So anyway,
Great.
yeah. No,
Great stuff.
so,
Yep.
hmm
No, yeah, again, you guys you're hitting it, with you and I, probably about every second or third word we say could trigger an arc that could go for 3 hours of conversation. But it's a very needed, very important element of the conversation that we have to have. And it's interesting. You were talking about microgravity. You know, you and I have both been around long enough to know that that was what we were promised on the original space station. That there was going to be a microgravity lab, and I think it came down to like none of the astronauts wanted to clean the hamster cages, and so they canceled it. But which if you've ever had a hamster, imagine that in zero G.
I hear that there's that in China, in Japan somewhere, there's hardware, there's artificial gravity hab, like that got mothballed and sitting in Japan
Absolutely, yeah,
somewhere.
I've heard about
Yeah.
that too. Yeah, and it just got jettisoned because. And here's the thing, Steve. Going back to your Space Settlement Act, and we're going to come back from the break, and we're going to talk specifically about that. Because that act wasn't there, which, in its essence, basically told NASA this is part of your mission. NASA's mission, as self defined, is to explore and basically to go on camping trips. If you're going on camping trips and you're not going to a place to live there, then what happens to your bone structure or your children generations in isn't part of your mandate, and it becomes something that you can throw overboard. That's, to me, very specifically, very clearly why they didn't ever go down that path, because that's not, quote unquote, and I'm doing air quotes for those of you who are listening, but that's not their job as they've seen it for the years since then. And we're going to come back because this is an area that I've been maddeningly frustrated by. Yeah, so we're going to take a break. We're going to come back, and we're going to deal with that issue. What is the job of NASA and the space agency, and where you went with that before anybody else ever did. All right, spacers, we're going to come right back. My name is Rick Tomlinson. You're listening to the Space Revolution at Rocket Rick on the X with Steve Wolfe from the Beyond Worth. It is Beyond Worth, actually. It's invaluable what you're doing. Beyond Earth Institute. Talk to you in a minute. Hey there, spacers. Welcome back to the Space Revolution. We are definitely talking to one of the early revolutionaries right now. And at the end of the last segment, you could sense I was getting a little fired up about the idea of that many of us believe that NASA's job, many folks naively believe NASA's job is to go out there, explore space, and prepare the ground, shall we say, prepare the way for us to follow. That is not the case. It has, except for one bright shining moment that we're going to talk about in a moment, has never been the case for NASA. That is us making stuff up. NASA has never been told, you guys go out there, explore it, and then do the things that are necessary for people to follow. In other words, they've never been told to be like Lewis and Clark, knowing that the wagons are going to come later, that kind of thing. And except for one brief moment, and this is where Steve comes in. So, back in the '80s, I was coming into the space field, being a space virgin. I was so excited, like many of you are, as you're watching SpaceX and all this cool stuff coming in, and you're like, "Wow, this is amazing." At the time, I didn't realize this, what I just told you, and I couldn't understand. I was working for Jerry O'Neill, who wrote The High Frontier, and I couldn't understand why nothing was happening, or why NASA wasn't going that way, and I just couldn't understand it. But it hadn't really dawned on me yet. So I remember getting called in front of the Reagan Commission to testify, and they were doing a report for President Reagan at that point. I was very young, and I showed up, and my brilliant idea at the time was that we needed astronauts on talk shows, and that NASA needed more money. And that would solve everything. Because if the astronauts could just share their experience, which my friend Frank White, our friend, calls the overview experience, everybody would go. It'd be totally clear. And if we gave NASA more money, they would do more stuff, and then we would open it up. I didn't realize that was completely wrong. So I run into Steve Wolfe. Steve is working for Congressman George Brown from California, and he is working to pass a law, shorthand Space Settlement Act of 1988. And what this law did was tell NASA that part of your job is to clear the way. So first of all, briefly, tell us about the law, and then I want to talk about how you schooled me.
Yeah, well, no, it's interesting though. I think that the testimony you gave must have been to the National Commission on Space, Tom Payne's group. Well,
exactly.
And if you recall, that report came out, and one of the recommendations in there was that we should have a policy relating to space settlement, that we should be developing space settlement capabilities. I forget exactly how it was worded. But, I came to the Hill. I was already bitten by the Jerry O'Neill bug, in high school. So, when I was in college, I ran an L5 chapter, so I was already fully steeped in, fully soaked in the O'Neillian mindset. And so when I came to Capitol Hill, I wanted to work for a member. I wanted to work for doing space policy, right? So that was my criteria for taking a job. And I found this wonderful, George E. Brown Jr. Look him up. Was the chairman of the Science and Technology Committee, well beloved, sort of a scientist in his own right. And I was coming to and so when the commission report came out and had this recommendation in there, and I just read Frank White's book in 1987, so all these things kind of came together. And then finally, my George sort of challenged. He had a way of challenging his staff to say, "Listen, don't just give me recommendations that are the obvious recommendations for legislations. Think big." And that's really all that I needed. And I said, I recommended, well, why don't we do something on space settlement? Here's the commission saying that we should do this. And of course, all of the senior staff in the office were going like, no, don't do that. But George, the visionary that he was, said, let's do it, And so I crafted I had already given him a draft, but finished crafting it and so forth. basically requiring a changing. It did ask to change the NASA Act, although the final bill actually didn't. But that's okay. And it created created a reporting requirement, basically saying, okay, NASA needs to let us know every 2 years how close are we getting with regards to being ready to be able to create space settlements, and a whole range of criteria, not only technology but also commercial development. How are we working? How are we working with the private sector and so forth to achieve this? And then so we introduced it. I think that and again, it was another one of those things where you're just surprised about how many people were very 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 supportive of that. Um, but to your point, Rick, and I'll conclude there, and I'll turn it back to you for a moment, because I want to get into how you kind of came into this picture. But you're absolutely right. NASA's mission is science and exploration, period, full stop. And frankly, that was still the case after the passage of the Space Settlement Act. And I think only now we're entering a period of NASA's other responsibilities help to stimulate the commercial sector. And that's only very recent. For those people who are excited about commercial crew and commercial and CLD and other kinds of public-private ventures that NASA has been in, that's all brand new stuff. Now the settlement side is still wide open, and there's still hesitancy there. But let me pause there for a moment.
Yeah, and if you could move your mic because it's rushing. I think it's brushing against your clothing.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, and good. Well, yeah. So I was working for Jerry O'Neill in Princeton Space Studies Institute. I had also founded an L5. And around 88, we were moving towards founding the Space Frontier Foundation. But then I kind of got put on, I guess, assignment or hiatus or whatever to come down to DC and start doing the Amtrak thing, from New York City down to DC to work with you. Um, and then you taught me. I
Yeah.
mean, you were my teacher. I knew nothing about DC at that point.
Well, that was great. Just to, my memory, was just getting this call, from you at some point, saying, "Hey, I love what you're doing. This is great. I want to come down and help you out." And I was like, "Dude, come on down," And I know, I mean, I think you really, work the pavement. Anyone knows about the Capitol Hill jobs, the staff are overworked and underpaid tremendously. And I was working this bill, but I also had, I probably had 10 other issues that I was trying to track. And so the fact to have boots on the ground, someone who's able to walk the halls and try to get those co-sponsorships and have those conversations, it really made a big difference. And frankly, obviously George's status within the committee was important. So this was something that he wanted, and so the committee agreed and in markup to include the provisions, most of the provisions. There was some modification to that, but I think what you did, Rick, I don't know of anyone else that did more work, really more work on it than you did. So you certainly do deserve a lot of credit for that.
So,
Mhm.
so Steve, real quick, because I just realized you and I are talking about it. We kind of touched on it very specifically and briefly. What did it tell NASA to do?
Well, we should be clear that the legislation, ultimately the operative language, it was the sense of Congress that uh, that all of our activities, it was a statement that said that Congress agrees that all of our activities that we are doing in relationship to space are going to ultimately lead us towards a space settlement future, and that was a good thing. That space settlements were a good thing and were consistent with the general welfare of the country, right? So it wasn't so much a directive to NASA as much as it was a declaration. And this was the language that we wanted to insert. We had wanted to insert into the original NASA Act, which we didn't quite get. But it was a statement of Congress. And then then based on this statement that space settlement was a good thing and is a natural outcome of all our things, which is in of itself is an interesting sort of jujitsu thing where Congress is, there's a sort of there's an understanding that we're heading towards a space settlement future, and that's a good thing for the world, certainly good for the country. So yeah, I mean, does that answer your question? Because I think sometimes people
Yeah,
think
and for,
it's easy for people to say, "Oh, we created a space settlement goal for NASA." There's nuance. There's more nuance there, though, which I think is
right, but they were told basically, and I think this is the part that the administrator at the time hated, was that they had to actually report on the progress that the agency was making towards that space settlement future. And if I recall correctly,
no, that's exactly right.
that,
That's the other
and that was
part.
that,
That's the other part of the bill that said that was the reporting requirement. Yeah.
right. And then next couple points were that I think that was a guy named Dan Golden at the time. More stories about him later, but um, and I've heard, I can't remember, but I heard that he put a junior staffer or somebody on it named Lori Garver or something, and he was like, "You take care of this" or something like that. Um, and then, and then a few years later, I'm trying to hurry us along a little bit here, but a few years later, under the Paperwork Reduction Act, under the Clinton Gore administration, where they were going through and saying we have too many little regulations. I guess NASA popped up and said, "Hey, we've got one for you to get rid of,"
Yeah.
and they put it in the shredder. Right? Is that roughly what happened?
Yeah. I mean, that's what I understand. There was hesitancy. I don't think even before that there was. I there was some. It's interesting. We have a guy that was at NASA headquarters who's actually has been researching the history of this. We're actually going to put an article of his on this very topic in our new journal, the Beyond Earth journal that we're creating this year. Um, so yeah, and apparently it was one sort of like 1 or 2 pager kind of thing where NASA, and I think they still maintain, NASA basically it takes the attitude that, well, everything that we do supports eventual space settlement. Anything, and so therefore, why do we even have to put a report into that? And I think that gets to the point even right now where I don't know if you're aware. I mean, even right now when we have these I've been having these conversations this year, and actually there were people in NASA, I won't name names, the people in NASA who were promoting the idea that maybe it's time for NASA to have a space settlement goal. Maybe they really could do that. And maybe the administrator could embrace that idea. How crazy would that be?
That's crazy talk. I mean,
That's crazy talk.
okay, it's only what 25 years later. I'm so glad they're finally thinking
Well,
about it.
well, as far as it went though, because I think the pushback against by the old guard, it's the same thing. It's like, well, wait a minute. Everything that NASA does is in promotion of we'll support eventual space settlement if it happens, and therefore, why do we have to make a statement about it? And that because if they make a statement, then they open themselves up to ridicule and skepticism, and they're just too afraid of that. Rather than
Well, I
simply
think it's also,
embracing this mission.
yeah, I think it's also, if you're going for space settlement, if you're trying to enable those people who are going to come down after you, you can't get away with the Senate launch scam, the SLS, right? Because it's not an enabler. It doesn't. It's not regular transportation. There, you can't justify it. You can't justify the way that they're looking at doing Artemis, which is sort of a use it and throw it away approach. You have to. You'll be scrutinized. Like, hey, maybe you should recycle this stuff. Maybe you should enable the private sector to, and so it causes them to have to rethink. And we'll wrap up the section here real quick, but I went to a Houston event where I was invited by NASA on Artemis, and they showed me a bunch of slides, Steve, or showed us, the audience, about all their planning for Artemis. None of them had private citizens in them. None of it. They had at one point a Venn diagram that showed all the different things that Artemis does. And, for international cooperation, for science, for strategic, all of these things. And the hilarious part, Steve, was, how Venn diagrams are a bunch of circles. And right in the middle was an empty space. They could have put like a person's face in there and said, and we're doing it for you. It didn't even occur to them that at the end of the day, it's for us. And then my hand shot up, and there were some people from National Space Society said, oh, here we go. And the deputy administrator, the lady who's actually runs NASA under Mr. Nelson. Was
Yeah,
there.
Pam. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Pam. And I was like, what about this? And your order of consultation, you talk to international partners, you talk to aerospace, you talk to da-da-da. There's nowhere on there where they talk to like folks, to people about it, right? And I asked her about all that. And then as they were wrapping it up, I stepped over to the stage. People were still in the room, and I said, I don't mean to be confrontational. Maybe we should have a conversation about that. And she said to me, and I'm never going to forget this. She said, Rick, outside of the bubble, your ideas and the things you all talk about are fringe. We are the fringe, Steve. We're still the fringe. Now, I think the day after Starship flies the second time, that'll probably change. But we're going to come right back now, and I want to hear your response to that. All right. We're going to take a little break. We're going to come back with Steve Wolfe. And again, fascinating stuff. What's important that you, the listeners, understand, or the viewers here, is that what you're seeing happen now has deep roots. And there have been a lot of true space revolutionaries like Steve Wolfe out there fighting for a long, long time to make it happen. We're going to come right back and talk about a little bit of this and then wrap things up towards the end. You're listening to iRock Space Radio, and this is the Space Revolution. I am Rick Tumlinson. We'll be right back. All right, Spacers, we're in the last quarter here. I've got my amazing guest, Steve Wolfe, one of the original. You know what? You're an OG, man.
I'm definitely an OG.
Gangsta.
We are both OG, man.
Yeah, I know. I originally, when I first heard OG, I didn't know what it was. I thought it meant old guy, and I was like really upset. And then one of my friends who comes out of more of a hip hop culture, he's like, "No, man, that means like original gangster." I said, "Oh, I'll take that. That's cool." So you are OG. So look, Steve, I was challenging you or trying to set you up there to have this conversation that it doesn't seem like the establishment gets it yet. Now, the work you're doing with Beyond Earth is critical to making that happen.
Yeah, I think you're right. I do think, though, that we have to, it's interesting that Pam would say that in public. I mean, I tell you what I hear about Pam is that she kind of, if you were to actually have a conversation with her, she kind of gets it. She's actually one of us, I think. And I think that's always a bit of the challenge, because sometimes folks that are most in line with your vision can be the most conservative, right? Because they don't want to lose anything, So, you know what I mean? I don't know, you probably have seen that kind of person. And I think well, first of all, she's brilliant. I don't want to take anything away from her. I think she's been doing a great job. But the Artemis program is flawed, obviously, in a lot of ways, except that it is a vehicle. It is a vehicle, meaning it is a program that is getting Americans, back to the moon. it has a lot of work to do in terms of in terms of incorporating the commercial participation, right?
Sure.
We Beyond Earth has been very interested in this whole idea of the base camp. Talk about Artemis base camp, but what does that mean? They're talking about dropping down a small habitat. Two astronauts will spend maybe 1 month out of the year there. What is that? What is that? So
Right.
they really need to be creating a much broader framework about and hats off to the Europeans that are talking about a lunar village concept, which
Right.
is okay, there's going to be a diverse set of activities that are going on there. Some robotics, some humans, and so forth. And I think that we either need to sort of join with that international idea or expand our own vision that incorporates a broader view of human activity on the moon. And that's where I mean and is that entirely NASA's responsibility to do that? Then you get into this whole realm of where's the edges of NASA's responsibility, and where does maybe the Department of Commerce needs to be more active in that domain. Certainly the FAA is stepping up in terms on the regulatory side for human activity in space. So but I do think that there is, and I think what Beyond Earth is trying to do is continue to have these high level conversations where people could just feel more comfortable. So every conversation we're talking about CLD and maintaining the CLD program, for example, and even Artemis for that matter. But we don't hesitate in talking about, well, what is this? Why are we doing this? It's really so that we can get closer and closer to the development of human communities beyond Earth, and so we can create this broader. So we're trying to. It's always about creating this context for this exciting opportunity that's taking place. It's probably, as you say, fringe was, I think it may be, it's probably going to still be a while yet, but we just have to keep, as you just keep messaging, and again, when Courtney and I get on there and other folks from our group, we're talking very soberly and we talk very candidly about eventual space migration, and people just have to, the more you say it, the more people,
Right.
start to get it. So,
No, I think that and by the way, she might have been doing that as like a warning, like, hey, outside of here, you're French. I get that, and I do respect her. I think that what I'm concerned about is, again, because NASA is, and by the way, the entire Artemis conversation that I'm talking about was in the context of we're going to the moon to practice going to Mars, and that's NASA's eventual goal. Totally cool with that, as long as along the way, because Elon wants to go to Mars. But in the meantime, he'll take his freaking starship and we'll be able to do other stuff with it. It's cool.
sure.
Uh, but again, I'm trying to carry all of this stuff there, and I'm being like, okay, I need a pickup truck, and they're building a motorcycle in their mind, and it's like, okay, we'll be able to get there, but nobody else will, that kind of thing. So we have to keep pushing, and you guys are doing great work there with that. But anyway, let's transition for a minute here, because you and I, again, we'll probably have to have you on again, and we'll get like specific topics and that kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Hmm.
But keep doing what you're doing with Beyond Earth. I think that is fantastic. And so let's talk. I'm going to completely pivot now, and we're going to relax a little bit. And I'm going to ask you my typical questions that I ask, and anybody who listens to this knows that I do this. So, really hardcore, serious stuff. I mean, you're a wonk, man, and I know this is going to blow you out. I know it is, but So you're flying over the moon, and you're in a vehicle, and you can feel the speed, several thousand kilometers an hour, and you're looking down. What music would you be listening to, Steve? I know that totally threw you for what you were.
other than Rocket Man or Elton John. Uh, I'd probably opt for like I don't know. I'm not a big classical music person, but I might opt for something really like something from uh, uh, Mozart. Just a real
Very cool.
soaring, one of his soaring arias, or whatever. So that might be possible. So
Okay.
yeah,
Now, let
I
me ask you
yeah,
then.
in that context, I wouldn't say that that's music that I'm listening to on a regular basis. But
No, it's for the moment. I get you.
yeah,
I should have introduced that with my favorite Monty Python line, which is "and now for something completely different." Uh, but what is your favorite? Who is your favorite science fiction author or book?
I think I was most influenced by Dune when I was most taken by Dune, and then Stranger in a Strange Land by Heinlein. I think many of us were, Heinlein fans.
Yeah.
Although I try to read that book now, though it's a little. There's I'm not sure if it holds up from a political correct standpoint, but um, uh, and then lately it's the three body problem, books by the Chinese author. I forget his name, but really,
Okay.
really interesting stuff. Yeah, that's what
And
I would.
nonfiction?
Uh, oh, nonfiction.
Yeah.
Hmm, that's interesting. I tend to I read I like biographies by about presidents, American presidents. So
Okay.
I'm working on my second biography of right now of Ulysses S. Grant. It was one of the most interesting stories of any American president.
Wow. Okay. Interesting. I'm putting that one on my list.
Hmm.
So your favorite movie or TV show, science fiction?
Um, Yeah, hands down. I mean, The Expanse. The Expanse has just been really has hit every element for me, even more so than the Star Trek, and as much as I love that as well, and certainly Star Wars. But The Expanse, the realism, the sense that the technology is so close to what's possible and what the future could be. So yeah, totally.
Okay. So wanted to get those out of the way, and
Yeah.
it's kind of a tradition. That's all. But so
And of course, that's
you are.
your I'm thinking about all sorts of other books and movies and things like that, but those are
Oh yeah.
first top of mind. Yeah.
Yeah, and nowadays, we could put like 30 of them on a chip, so it doesn't matter. You get them all with you, right? The entire Heinlein
Yeah.
collection.
Hmm.
But so you are a man of vision, and what do you? Let's say let's say Starship succeeds. Maybe by the time somebody listens to this, it will have already. But Starship is starting to look like a viable way of getting past the Robert Heinlein thing. 100 miles up and you're halfway to anywhere. Badly paraphrased, but and so we're starting to get access. What do you see? What do you want to see, given the
You
context
know
of the
it.
world as it is?
It's amazing because even as you and I understand what the potential is, it is still so hard to envision that reality, even though it may be so close at hand. I mean, heck, you're right. They're about to do another launch. And uh, it's hard to imagine how to how to overstate, the potential there, if I'm using that term right. Because now, especially if you get down to the dollars per pound that Elon is quoting, and I don't know what it is, like $10 a pound or something ridiculous, that the Starship could ultimately do. Because then you just create just so much opportunity for in-space operations, manufacturing, accessing, the potential for creating, say, just the first human habitat. I mean, it's interesting. You have a number of these habitat companies like Gravitix, and even the new one, Vast. They're building their habitats to fit into the Starship, right? And these are habitats that will have artificial gravity. They're sort of, you've seen these pictures, how they'll take the modules and then link them into a big circle and then spin the whole thing to create artificial gravity. So there's all these scenarios, so especially, and again, especially for human occupation. So you could be very rapidly, within less than 10 years, certainly within 20 years, you could see really significant human habitats in orbit, certainly on the lunar surface. It's a little mind-boggling to consider. And I even now, I'll get on the call with somebody talking about, what's the future potential for human settlement of space. And I'll say, well, certainly by the end of the century, but, it could be much, much sooner. It could be within 30 years, within 40 years, we could be seeing the first, decent size 50 to 100 person facility, mainly based on this launch capacity, the launch capacity of the Starship. It really is just a little staggering. And of course, Elon, of course, I think he's still maintaining that he's going to be sending people to Mars within 10 years. So, so it's impossible to overstate the potential, I think.
So, final question. We have a lot of listeners of different ages, of different, involvements in the field around the world. Some of whom are in the field, but some of whom would love to be, and that's why they're listening to folks like you. What do you tell somebody who wants to? What's great about you and I is we're not engineers, right? we are not engineers. And what do you tell somebody out there who has this as a dream? What would you suggest to them in just a couple of minutes here?
Yeah, no, I think you and I are good examples of this, where you just have to, I came about this when I was young, where I didn't know what I wanted to do. All I knew was that I had this tremendous passion for this vision that I read about in O'Neill. It just completely consumed me. I thought I was going to be an astronaut, and didn't quite pass the test for the Air Force Academy, which I thought that's what you had to do. You had to get into the Air Force, and then you had to be an aerospace engineer and all this. And that wasn't really me, And I had a guidance counselor in high school, where he said, "What do you want to be?" And I said, I want to be an astronaut. I want to be an aerospace engineer so I can be an astronaut. And he goes, well, I don't really know what, if you're going to, I don't, it's based on my scores are okay, but based on this, I'm not really sure that that's really where you're headed, or your strengths are. And my reaction was, I don't care if I have to push a broom in NASA. I'll do that. It's that feeling that you have to believe in the purpose. For me, not everybody, I get it, but for me, it has to be being part of this this creating this future, and whatever part that you could play to your strength. So it might be engineering, it might be sciences, it might be it might be it might be marketing and communications. It might be in management. Just it might be in software. That just and what's really exciting now is that the opportunities are far more in the space domain than they've ever been before. So it's really, don't try. I guess the thing is, don't try to be something that you're not. There's a role for you in this grand purpose that fits your greatest strengths. So just focus. So stick with your greatest strengths, and then contribute that to the cause, if you will. So I'm getting all choked up. Oh my God.
Oh no, man, I can hear you. No, that's it. That's it. You nailed it right there in the end, right?
Mhm.
You know, be you and apply you to the grand purpose, and you'll find a way in. That's brilliant. Steve, again, I thank you for helping me find my way in back in the day. And it's been great having you. We'll have to have you back. Go support the Beyond Earth Institute. Pick up a copy of The Obligation and go look up the 1988 Space Settlement Act. You'll be amazed. Thank you very much, Steve. And for the rest of y'all, thank you for tuning in. We are out the air.